Welcome to Drift Off to History. Tonight we begin the story of the Vatican. Imagine a small city, walled and still, nestled in the heart of Rome. Its cobbled streets glow in lamplight. Its domes rise like ancient prayers into the dusk. This is Vatican City, the smallest nation on earth, yet a place where history breathes in every stone. Over the next hour, we'll drift gently through time, from pagan rituals to Renaissance art, from whispered prayers to global voices. Let this story unfold around you like candlelight flickering through a marble corridor. Before we begin, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's always lovely to imagine all of us scattered across the world, quietly unwinding together. And if this video does help you to drift off, give it a like or feel free to subscribe. Now breathe deeply, let your thoughts slow, and join me for the story of the Vatican. In those distant days, the boundaries of the city were sacred. The Pomerium, an invisible line drawn by ritual and tradition, marked the space where Rome ended and something wilder began. Vatican Hill lay just outside that line, beyond the reach of temples and senators, but not beyond the reach of memory. The hill became a place of rest for the dead, dotted with tombs, mausoleums, and quiet gardens of stone. The Etruscans and early Romans came here not for glory, but to remember, to leave offerings, to speak softly to those who had passed beyond the veil. Time moved gently in this place. Seasons passed over sun-warmed earth. Cypress trees swayed in the wind, and the Tiber flowed on, always flowing, like the breath of the land itself. But as Rome grew in might and ambition, this peaceful slope took on a new shape. Under the rule of Emperor Caligula, a vast arena was built here. The Circus of Nero, they would come to call it. A place of spectacle, a place of blood. Long and curved like a great stone womb, it echoed with the roar of crowds, the clash of hooves, the shrill cries of victory and defeat. The earth that had once welcomed silence now shuddered beneath wheels and shouts. And then came the fire. In the year 64 AD, flames engulfed the heart of Rome. Whether by accident, vengeance, or imperial whim, no one truly knew. But the city burned for days, and the people cried out for justice. Emperor Nero, indulgent, theatrical, and deeply feared, sought a scapegoat. He turned to a new and rising sect, the Christians. They were a mystery to many. Followers of a crucified teacher from Judea, they gathered in secret, spoke of love and resurrection, and refused to honor the old gods. To Nero, they were convenient, and so the circus became their grave. It is said that among them was a man named Simon, known to the world now as Saint Peter. Once a fisherman on the Sea of Galilee, he had walked beside Jesus. He had denied him. He had wept, and in the end, he had come to Rome, not for glory, but to serve. His arrest was swift, his sentence brutal. According to tradition, Peter was led into the arena and crucified, but in his final request, he asked that the cross be turned upside down, feeling himself unworthy to die as his teacher had. Beneath the Roman sky, he breathed his last. No crowds cheered, no monuments were raised. His body was taken by quiet hands and buried just beyond the circus grounds, on that old hill where the dead had always lain. The grave was humble, no marble, no gold, just earth and a memory. Years passed, empires shifted, emperors came and went, but the story of Peter remained, his name whispered in darkened rooms where early Christians gathered. His courage passed like a torch from voice to voice, and slowly, gently, pilgrims began to find their way to the hill, not in great numbers, not yet, but enough to mark the beginning of something sacred. They came not to seek miracles, but to stand where he had stood, to feel the closeness of sacrifice, of loyalty, of love that did not break, even beneath the weight of a cross. The soil, once soaked in forgotten tears, began to take on a quiet holiness. And though no one could yet see what would come, the cathedrals, the paintings, the papal crown, something had begun. Not with a trumpet, but with a grave. Not with a crown, but with a man who chose humility even in death. As you lie still now, and let your thoughts float across the twilight of ancient Rome, picture the hill, empty but for wind and silence. Picture the fading light of evening slipping through the cypress branches. And imagine that first grave, soft in the earth, untouched by stone, carrying within it the seed of a story that would shape centuries. In the quiet years that followed Peter's death, the city of Rome moved on, as it always had, its streets busy with merchants and senators, its temples flickering with the light of countless oil lamps, its empire expanding like the slow breath of a sleeping giant. But beyond the marble colonnades and beneath the surface of daily life, something invisible was beginning to stir, a soft current of faith winding its way through the alleys and undercrofts of the eternal city. Christianity remained small, fragile, even dangerous. It was not yet a religion of cathedrals and bishops in gilded robes. It was a faith carried in whispers, a loaf of bread passed from hand to hand, a candle flickering in a secret room. Men and women gathered not for spectacle, but for something gentler, a shared story, a remembered meal, a promise of life beyond death. And at the heart of it all was Peter, not as a towering figure of power, but as a memory, a man who had loved, failed, forgiven, and followed. His tomb, hidden beneath the soil of the Vatican Hill, became more than a place of rest. It became a point of return. Those who had never met him still came to be near him. They knelt in the dust, wept quietly, prayed for strength. They left tokens, a scrap of cloth, a carved fish, a single olive branch. The grave was unmarked by grand architecture, but it pulsed with meaning, like a wellspring beneath the earth, unseen but ever flowing. And from this quiet place, a new kind of leadership began to emerge. The early Christian communities were scattered, some in Antioch, others in Alexandria, Corinth, Jerusalem. But Rome was different. It was the heart of the empire, the city of roads and power. And the man buried on its edge had walked beside the founder of their faith. Slowly, reverently, the followers began to look to the Bishop of Rome as a source of unity. He was not yet called Pope, but he carried Peter's mantle, not of dominion, but of devotion. These early bishops lived simple lives. They taught, listened, encouraged. They endured suspicion and sometimes death. But even in their humility, their role grew. Letters were exchanged between communities. Disputes were settled with appeals to Rome. The bishop there was not the master of all, but the servant of many, holding together the threads of a fragile and growing faith. As decades turned into centuries, persecution rose and fell like a slow tide. Some emperors ignored the Christians, others hunted them. Yet always the faithful remained. In the darkness of catacombs and the silence of moonlit rooms, they passed on their prayers, their psalms, their hope. They remembered the words of Christ. They remembered the bravery of Peter, and with each passing year, the soil above his grave became more sacred. Stories began to spread, that Peter's tomb glowed at night, that the sick found comfort there, that the very air felt different. Whether or not these tales were true hardly mattered. What mattered was the love that built them, the memory that endured, the faith that turned a forgotten burial ground into a quiet cathedral of the heart. There was no triumphal march, no great proclamation, only the slow, steady rise of something deep and enduring, the idea that love, even crucified, could become eternal, that a hill soaked in sorrow could become the cornerstone of peace. And so, as you rest now, imagine a night in ancient Rome, the streets still, the stars soft above the rooftops, the river whispering its endless lullaby. And somewhere beyond the city walls, on a hill still known only to a few, a single lantern glows beside a grave. A lantern lit not for mourning, but for hope. Time drifted onward, and with it, the gentle spread of a faith once whispered only in shadows. By the dawn of the 4th century, Christianity was still not welcome in the courts of emperors. It remained, in many places, a risk, a quiet defiance carried in the hearts of the faithful. But beneath the weight of Rome's grandeur and pagan ritual, change was stirring. Something ancient was beginning to soften, and then, almost like a breath held too long, it broke into the open. The man who would carry Christianity from the margins of the empire into the heart of its power was not a priest, nor a martyr, nor even a believer in the beginning. He was a soldier, a general, a ruler with the empire in his grip. His name was Constantine. The story of his transformation is one both shrouded in legend and illuminated by belief. It is said that, before a great battle, Constantine looked to the sky and saw a sign, a cross of light above the sun, and the words, "In this sign, conquer." That night he dreamed of Christ. The next day, he ordered his soldiers to mark their shields with the Christian symbol. And when he emerged victorious, something within him had changed. In the year 313 AD, Constantine issued the Edict of Milan, a declaration that ended the persecution of Christians throughout the empire. It did not make Christianity the official religion, not yet, but it did something perhaps more meaningful. It allowed the quiet light to shine freely for the first time. No longer hidden in catacombs or whispered in fear, the faith of Peter stepped into the open air. And almost at once, eyes turned back to that simple grave on Vatican Hill. Constantine's mother, Helena, a devout Christian with a soul steeped in reverence, journeyed to the Holy Land to uncover the sacred places of Christ's life. But in Rome, her son looked toward Peter's resting place, humble and half forgotten, beneath layers of earth and time. It was there that he commissioned the building of a church, not just a shrine, but a basilica. The old St. Peter's Basilica rose slowly, stone by stone, above the Apostles' tomb. Work began in the 320s, and it would take decades to complete. Its grand columns and gilded mosaics stood in stunning contrast to the modest grave below. Yet it was not a monument to glory. It was a gesture of love, a public acknowledgement of the past's pain and the faith that had endured through fire. The very ground had to be reshaped. A platform was built to level the uneven slope of the hill. Earth was moved. Foundations were laid, and at the heart of it all, beneath the high altar, the bones of St. Peter remained, untouched, revered, encased in solemn quiet. Pilgrims came, not in secret now, but in daylight. They knelt on marble floors and raised their eyes to shimmering ceilings. They brought with them stories, prayers, and tears, and as they prayed, the idea of the Vatican was born, not yet as a nation, not yet as the seat of papal might, but as a spiritual home. Constantine himself was not baptized until the end of his life, and yet the path he opened changed the course of history. Christianity became legal. Churches bloomed across the empire like spring blossoms after a long frost. The bishops of Rome, once fugitive leaders, stepped slowly into the light, and the tomb that once marked a shameful death became the axis around which the church began to turn. It is a strange and beautiful irony that the empire which once hunted down the followers of Christ would one day carry their teachings on banners, carve their stories into stone, and place their faith at the center of its own heart. As night deepens around you now, imagine the basilica rising in the golden dusk of the 4th century. Its great arches still unfinished, the scent of fresh-cut stone in the air, the murmured chants of pilgrims blending with the rustle of leaves on Vatican Hill. A new era had begun. The faith of Peter, once scattered like seeds on uncertain soil, was beginning to bloom, vast, visible, and deeply, wonderfully alive. By the time the old basilica had stood for several centuries, the church itself had become something far greater than a collection of faithful hearts. It had become a power, a quiet growing force stretching out across the remnants of a crumbling empire. Rome no longer ruled the known world as it once had. The Caesars had fallen silent, but in their place rose another kind of sovereignty, not born of sword or coin, but of spirit. The bishops of Rome, successors to Peter, had long offered guidance to scattered Christian communities, but in the Middle Ages, their voice grew louder. They were no longer simply shepherds of souls. They had begun to wear crowns. The Vatican, still centered around the hill that held Peter's bones, evolved into something more than a pilgrimage site. It became the seat of the papacy, and the Pope became not only the spiritual leader of Western Christianity, but a political figure with influence over kings, emperors, and the fate of nations. The Church began to rule its own lands, the Papal States, a patchwork of territory across central Italy. From their residence in Rome, the popes governed both faith and field. And yet, even as their temporal authority expanded, the Vatican remained, in many ways, a sacred beacon for the wandering faithful. Pilgrims came from across Europe, often walking for weeks or months, to reach the basilica that sheltered Peter's tomb. They came in sandals and silence, carrying satchels of bread and hearts full of yearning. Some sought healing, others forgiveness. Many came simply to kneel, to rest their hands on ancient stone and feel, if only for a moment, closer to something eternal. The roads to Rome became rivers of devotion. Along the way, pilgrims passed shrines, monasteries, and chapels, each one a stepping stone to the holy city. The closer they came, the more the world seemed to shift. The noise of daily life faded, replaced by bells, chants, and the gentle hush of reverence. Within the Vatican's growing walls, relics were gathered, fragments of saints' bones, splinters of the true cross, cloths said to have dried the tears of the Virgin Mary. Whether one believed in their power or not, their presence was felt, not in the objects themselves, but in the devotion they inspired. The Vatican became a treasury not only of wealth, but of memory. It was during this time that a bond was forged between throne and altar, a relationship that would shape Europe for centuries. In the year 800, on Christmas Day, Pope Leo III crowned Charlemagne as Emperor of the Romans, reviving the title that had fallen with the ancient West. It was a moment thick with symbolism, a pope placing a crown on the head of a king, a church affirming its right to anoint power itself. Yet the relationship was never simple. Through the medieval centuries, Popes and monarchs would struggle, sometimes bitterly, over where heaven ended and earth began. There were moments of grace and moments of great tension, but always the Vatican stood, a place where politics met prayer and where stone walls held the weight of both. Still, beneath the grandeur, the heart of the Vatican pulsed with a quieter rhythm, that of monks copying sacred texts by candlelight, of choirs rehearsing Gregorian melodies in shaded cloisters, of ordinary souls walking barefoot across marble floors. It was a time of ceremony and incense, of vestments and Latin liturgies, of mystery cloaked in gold. Outside, the world changed. Wars burned across kingdoms. Plagues darkened the land. But within the Vatican, time moved slowly, like dust falling through stained glass light. As you breathe deeply now and feel the hush of night settle around you, picture that world 1,000 years ago, when the Vatican was both a palace and a pilgrimage, when the air smelled of parchment and wax, and the voices of pilgrims echoed through ancient stone, a place where faith walked alongside power, and where, deep beneath the altar, Peter still slept beneath the soil. As the Middle Ages gave way to new light, a slow transformation unfurled across Europe, like the first golden rays of dawn brushing against a long-shadowed valley. It was the time of the Renaissance, when old knowledge was reborn, and beauty became a language through which humanity sought to reach the divine. And at the heart of this flowering stood the Vatican, no longer just a place of pilgrimage or power, but now a canvas for human imagination and sacred longing. By the 15th century, the ancient basilica that Constantine had built above Peter's tomb stood tired and worn. Its walls were weary from centuries of candle smoke and time. The mosaics faded, the arches sagging. It had watched over generations of prayers, of tears and rejoicing, but now it whispered of something new, the need to rise again. And so, with solemn courage and no small ambition, the decision was made. The old basilica would be replaced, not repaired, replaced. A new St. Peter's would rise above the apostles' bones, grander, nobler, worthy of the faith it had come to embody. The task was immense and would span lifetimes, but those who imagined it saw not a building, but a vision, a place where heaven might touch earth. Architects came, painters, sculptors, thinkers. Some of the greatest names in history passed through its gates, each leaving behind their brilliance like brushstrokes on eternity. Bramante began the design, envisioning a church with a great central dome, shaped like a perfect cross. Raphael followed, refining its elegance. And then, in a moment of destiny, Michelangelo, aged, weary, and full of genius, took up the burden. He did not see himself as an architect, and yet he gave the Vatican its most iconic shape. He lifted the great dome into the sky, soaring like a celestial lantern above Peter's grave. Each stone placed with care, each curve echoing the rhythm of stars. When it was finally completed, long after his death, it became more than a structure. It became a symbol, a silhouette against the Roman dusk, a prayer carved in stone. And yet, the transformation of the Vatican was not only architectural, its very soul seemed to awaken with new color, texture, and light. Within the papal apartments, Raphael painted his School of Athens, a grand fresco where ancient philosophers walked beneath archways of impossible grace. In the halls and chapels, biblical scenes unfolded in pigment and gold, each figure tenderly shaped to carry both beauty and belief. Even the great piazza that now stretches before the basilica, that sweeping, open embrace of colonnades, was the work of genius. Gian Lorenzo Bernini, the master of marble and motion, crafted it to feel like the arms of the church reaching out to the world. Beneath his hand, fountains danced, sculptures shimmered, and angels took flight in stone. But amid this splendor, there was also complexity. The Renaissance brought not only beauty, but ambition. Popes became patrons of art, yes, but also figures of political strategy and earthly concern. The Vatican filled with advisors, bankers, and whispers of intrigue. And to fund these soaring visions, indulgences were sold, a practice that would soon spark fires of reform and rebellion. Still, in the hush of early morning, before the crowds gathered and the sun lit the frescoes, the Vatican remained a place of wonder. Pilgrims still came, now awed not only by faith, but by the splendor it had inspired. They stood beneath Michelangelo's dome and felt the vastness of it all, the weight of time, of belief, of what human hands can build when guided by something higher. As you rest now, imagine standing there, at the center of St. Peter's Square. The fountains murmur beside you. The marble beneath your feet is cool and smooth. Overhead, the dome rises into an endless sky, and every detail around you, every brushstroke, every statue, every echo, speaks of love made visible. The Renaissance was not just an era of art. It was a dream brought into form. And here, in the heart of the Vatican, that dream still breathes in stone and shadow, waiting quietly beneath the hush of evening. Tucked within the heart of the Vatican stands a space unlike any other, a room both intimate and infinite, where time itself seems to fold and soften. It is not large by palace standards. There are no grand columns at its entrance, no towering spires overhead. And yet, to step inside the Sistine Chapel is to enter a universe painted in light. Built in the late 15th century under Pope Sixtus IV, whose name it bears, the chapel was designed not for the crowds of the curious, but for the quiet rituals of the church. Here, in solemn ceremony, cardinals would gather. Here, in hushed secrecy, a new pope would be chosen. And here, the walls and ceiling would come alive with some of the most breathtaking art the world has ever known. At first, the chapel was adorned by a host of Renaissance masters: Botticelli, Ghirlandaio, Perugino, each one contributing scenes from the lives of Moses and Christ along the side walls. These frescoes told stories, not with words, but with color and gesture, echoing the sacred rhythm of Scripture. But it was decades later, under the patronage of Pope Julius II, that the Sistine Chapel would be transformed into something celestial. The commission fell to Michelangelo Buonarroti, a sculptor by trade, a man who preferred marble to paint, solitude to spectacle. And yet he accepted the task and stepped into legend. For 4 long years, Michelangelo painted the ceiling. Day after day, he worked on scaffolding high above the chapel floor, brush in hand, neck craned to the sky. He labored not in comfort, but in silence and sweat, translating visions into pigment. What he created was not just art, it was a world. Across that curved vault, scenes from Genesis unfold with quiet majesty. The separation of light from darkness, the creation of Adam, that moment of almost touch between God and man, a fingertip's width from eternity. The fall, the flood, the beginning of everything. Each figure shaped with reverence, each color breathing life into the plaster. Years later, he would return to paint the altar wall. This time, a vision of the Last Judgment. It is a vast, swirling composition of saints, angels, and souls in motion. Not peaceful, but powerful. Not comforting, but true. It is the image of reckoning and grace, the closing of the story that began above. And yet, despite the grandeur, the chapel is still, always still. When the cardinals meet in conclave, the doors are locked from within. No sound escapes, no voices raised. They speak in Latin, they pray, they write names on slips of paper. And when a decision is made, when one among them is chosen, a small chimney atop the chapel releases its quiet signal. Black smoke for no, white smoke for yes. Crowds gather in the square, breath held beneath the Roman sky. And then, rising into the evening air, white smoke curls upward, soft as a sigh. A new pope has been chosen, and the bells of St. Peter's ring out once more. But when the crowds have gone, and the candles are low, the Sistine Chapel returns to silence. In that stillness, Michelangelo's sky watches over empty pews. The painted prophets dream their painted dreams. And the creation of Adam, frozen in that moment before touch, waits eternally for the hand to meet the hand. Now, as you drift deeper into sleep, imagine yourself lying beneath that vaulted sky. Let your gaze follow the curves of colour, the stories written in shadow and light. Let the stillness of the chapel fill your thoughts, like incense rising into the night. You are safe here, and the past is only ever a breath away. The 16th century arrived not with a whisper, but with a tremor, soft at first, like wind passing through leaves, then rising into a storm that would shake the foundations of the church. For while the Vatican shone with splendour, its chapels rich with art, its basilica rising skyward, its rituals deep in tradition, outside its walls, a different current had begun to flow. Europe was restless. The printing press had arrived, scattering words like seeds. Scholars questioned, priests debated, and among the faithful, a quiet unease stirred. Questions of indulgences, of wealth, of distance between church and soul. The Renaissance had awakened beauty, but it had also awakened inquiry. And then came a monk, Martin Luther, a quiet man of scripture and thought, posted his 95 Theses on the doors of a church in Wittenberg. He did not intend to fracture the world. He intended a conversation, but the words spread faster than fire in dry grass. People read and echoed and questioned, and soon the church that had stood unchallenged for centuries found itself staring into the eyes of reform. The Vatican, stunned at first, responded with resistance. Councils were called, debates were waged, excommunications delivered like thunderclaps. But the Reformation would not be silenced. It fractured the church into pieces: Lutherans, Calvinists, Anglicans, each carrying with them some echo of the old and something radically new. The pain of division was deep. Friends parted, cities split, wars flared in the name of belief. And yet, through it all, the Vatican remained, not unchanged, but challenged, and slowly it turned inward to reflect. The result was the Council of Trent, a gathering of bishops, scholars, and cardinals determined to reckon with the moment. They reaffirmed traditions, they clarified doctrine, they responded with resolve. But beneath the structure of theology, something quieter was taking place, a spiritual softening, a recognition that renewal was not just political, it was personal. New religious orders emerged. The Jesuits, with their sharp minds and quiet discipline, travelled across the world in service and education. Sacred music deepened in beauty. Art took on new tenderness, drawing hearts back to mystery. The Baroque movement, born in the shadow of division, filled chapels with golden light and angelic motion, a kind of visual embrace, as though the Church were reaching out to cradle the wounded soul. And while the Vatican had once stood above the world in strength, it now stood beside it in sorrow, learning, listening, evolving. The Pope remained a symbol, yes, but also a man among men, walking the difficult road between history and humility. Imagine, for a moment, those who lived through this change, those who had once walked to Rome in joyful unity, now finding themselves on different paths. Imagine a candlelit chamber within the Vatican, where a scribe copies the Psalms in silence, even as Europe splinters beyond the walls. Imagine the ache of loss and the quiet hope of reconciliation. Faith, after all, is not a perfect thing. It is a flame, flickering, sometimes threatened by wind, but never quite extinguished. And here, in the centuries of reform and response, the Vatican learned to shield that flame more gently, to hold it not as a weapon, but as a light. So now, as your thoughts begin to soften, picture the Vatican in twilight, its windows glowing with candlelight, its halls echoing with both sorrow and strength. Outside, the world is changing, but inside, the air is full of music, of prayer, of a church trying once more to understand its heart. There is something quietly magical about a place set behind walls, a sense that beyond the threshold lies another rhythm, another world. So it is with the Vatican, a city within a city, wrapped in stone, watched over by ancient gates and traditions that move not with the ticking of clocks, but with the cadence of centuries. Behind those high protective walls, life moves gently. Gardens stretch in hushed symmetry, their hedges clipped with devotion. Courtyards open into cloisters, where soft-footed priests walk in thought. Fountains gurgle in shaded corners. Time does not rush here, it lingers, as if reluctant to disturb the air. And yet, within this peaceful stillness, there are mysteries, layers of history folded, one upon the other, like pages in a leather-bound book. Some are visible to any visitor who stands beneath the dome or walks across St. Peter's Square. Others lie deeper, hidden, behind doors that do not open to the public eye. Among these secrets, perhaps none stirs the imagination so much as the Vatican Apostolic Archive, once known as the Secret Archive. It lies behind guarded thresholds, housed within the cool silence of stone corridors. Here rest more than 12 centuries of correspondence, manuscripts and memories, letters from kings and emperors, decrees written in trembling hands, personal notes from saints and sinners alike. There is no dusty chaos here. Everything is preserved, catalogued, and bound with reverence. The temperature is kept steady, the rooms softly lit. Historians may enter with permission, but not to browse freely, only to see what is asked for. Much of it remains unread, some of it, perhaps, unreadable, and still, it waits. What stories lie hidden there? What questions long buried? What quiet truths, still sleeping in the folds of ancient parchment? Elsewhere within the walls, another presence keeps quiet watch, dressed in vibrant uniforms of crimson, blue, and gold, uniforms said to be designed by Michelangelo himself. The Swiss Guard stands as living tradition. These young men, all from Switzerland, all Catholic, swear an oath of loyalty to the Pope and serve as both symbol and shield. You might see one standing at attention, motionless beneath a colonnade, his halberd in hand, eyes forward. Or you might spot another walking slowly beneath the arches, moonlight silvering the stones beneath his boots. Their movements are practiced, their presence quiet. And yet they remind the world that even here, in this place of prayer, vigilance has its place. Yet most of Vatican life is far from ceremonial. Within the walls live hundreds of people: cardinals, nuns, gardeners, librarians. They rise early, attend Mass, tend to their duties. Some study ancient languages, others brew coffee. Some transcribe choral music, while others sweep the marble halls before visitors arrive. In the evenings, when the crowds have faded and the square lies empty beneath the stars, the Vatican returns to itself. The bells are softer, the lights dim. A window glows behind heavy curtains. Somewhere, someone is reading. Somewhere, someone is praying. Imagine yourself there, now, as night settles over Rome. The gates are closed, the guard is posted, but inside the Vatican walls, peace hums like a low, gentle note. Beneath the stone and silence, thousands of years rest together, side by side, breath by breath, the living, the remembered, and the sacred, all gathered beneath the same still sky. By the mid-20th century, the world beyond the Vatican walls had changed in ways few could have imagined. 2 great wars had swept across continents. Cities had risen and fallen. New technologies buzzed through the air, shrinking oceans into minutes, bringing voices from across the globe into living rooms and churches alike. And amid this wave of motion, of progress and disquiet, the church, ancient, dignified, steady, stood quietly at a crossroads. Inside the Vatican, rituals remained as they had for centuries. Latin still echoed through vaulted chapels. Priests read from books copied by hand long before printing presses turned. Vestments shimmered with gold thread. And yet, the people outside the gates, the flock the church served, were different. They lived faster, thought wider, questioned more. Many still knelt in pews, but others drifted. Some searched for a faith that felt closer, more open, more alive. And so, in 1962, something extraordinary happened. Pope John XXIII, a man known for his warmth and humility, called for a council, not to condemn, not to retreat into old certainties, but to renew, to breathe fresh air into ancient halls, to open the windows, as he put it, and let the world's light shine in. Thus began the Second Vatican Council, or Vatican II, a gathering of bishops and theologians from nearly every corner of the earth. They came not as conquerors, but as listeners. For 4 years they met, spoke, prayed, and gently questioned. Not all agreed, not all were ready, but the spirit of the council was one of reflection, of tenderness, of change made with care. Out of this came transformation. Latin, long the language of mystery, gave way to the languages of the people, so that the Mass could be understood by every ear. The altar, once turned away from the congregation, was turned to face them. Lay people were invited into roles once held only by clergy. There was talk of dialogue with other faiths, of respect across beliefs, of reaching out instead of retreating inward. The Church did not rewrite itself, it remembered itself. It looked to the past, not to cling, but to understand, and to carry forward the heart of its mission in a world that was learning how to listen again. Even the architecture responded. Churches built in the wake of Vatican II were often simpler, more open, more filled with light. The music changed. The sermons grew more personal. The language of love, so long bound in formality, began to speak again in the soft tones of everyday life. Still, the changes were not without pain. For some, the traditions lost were wounds. For others, the changes did not go far enough. But in its heart, the council was a gesture of trust that the church, like the soul, could grow, that it could breathe with the people, that it could step forward without forgetting who it had been. Imagine now the great St. Peter's Basilica during those days, its dome rising into the blue Roman sky, the square below filled with pilgrims and press, anticipation in the air. Inside, rows of chairs lined with cardinals in crimson robes, the scent of incense, the murmur of Latin and English, French and Swahili. The voices of the world gathered under one roof. And then, as the years passed, the winds of renewal settled into a quiet breeze. The documents of Vatican II were written and shared. The world watched. Some wept, some doubted. But all, in some way, felt the breath of something timeless moving through the present. So now as you breathe slowly and feel the calm of evening wrap around you, picture those open windows. Picture a soft breeze lifting the curtains of tradition, sunlight spilling across the ancient floor, and listen for the echo, not of bells this time, but of voices in many tongues, speaking of unity, of compassion, of a church that still listens for the gentle whisper of grace. In the quiet folds of modern Rome, nestled beneath the ever-turning sun, there remains a city unlike any other. It has no army of its own. Its entire footprint could fit within a single corner of a sprawling metropolis. And yet, its voice carries across oceans. Its silhouette, a dome rising above rooftops, is known the world over. This is Vatican City, the smallest country on earth, and yet one of the most symbolically immense. It is a place of paradoxes, ancient yet alive, rooted in tradition yet in constant dialogue with the present. Within its walls lie treasures of immeasurable beauty: the Sistine Chapel, Raphael's rooms, Bernini's colonnade embracing the world like outstretched arms. And yet its greatest treasure is not gold or marble, but meaning, a sense that something sacred still breathes here, amid the echo of footsteps and the flutter of pigeons across St. Peter's Square. The Vatican today is both a home and a headquarters. It is the seat of the Pope, the Bishop of Rome, the spiritual leader of over 1 billion Catholics across every continent. But the man who walks these halls now is not a monarch. He is a pilgrim in his own right, navigating the path between past and future, tradition and tenderness, scripture and service. Daily life within the walls moves with quiet rhythm. Priests and scholars stroll along sun-dappled paths. Nuns tend to gardens and prayers. Vatican Radio broadcasts messages in dozens of languages. Documents are translated, decisions discussed. In hidden corners, restorers carefully clean centuries-old canvases with brushes finer than eyelashes. In others, archivists pore over letters from kings and revolutionaries. And yet, despite the solemn duties, the Vatican remains human. Laundry flutters from second-story balconies. The small post office hums with stamps and smiles. Swiss guards chat softly between shifts. And in the early hours of the morning, before the crowds arrive, you might hear the hush of the city waking up. Birdsong drifting through courtyards, the distant ring of a single bell, a shaft of golden light falling through a narrow window. Outside its walls, the Vatican remains deeply present in global affairs, as a diplomatic voice for peace, as a moral compass in times of uncertainty, as a place that reminds the world that stillness is not weakness, and reverence is not old-fashioned. From war-torn lands to bustling capitals, the words spoken here ripple outward, sometimes with great power, sometimes with quiet grace. And always, beneath the surface, beats the heart of its origin, that first grave on a quiet hill. The tomb of Peter, humble and hidden, still rests beneath the great dome. Pilgrims still come to touch the stone, to whisper prayers, to weep, to wonder. The circle has never broken. The soul of the Vatican has never forgotten where it began. So as the lights dim across the city and the great doors of St. Peter's close for the night, the Vatican sighs softly into sleep. The marble cools, the incense fades, and a single lantern flickers above a stone floor, casting golden light on centuries of devotion. Now, let your thoughts drift gently to that quiet courtyard, the stars above, the gentle breeze of Rome on your skin, the bell in the distance tolling once, then falling silent. The story of the Vatican, though rich and vast, is not about power. It is about presence, a presence that has endured through empires, through change, through time, like a candle that never goes out, no matter how dark the night may be. Now, our story comes to an end. The lanterns still flicker in the halls of the Vatican, the soft hush of prayer still lingers beneath the dome, and Peter's quiet tomb still rests beneath centuries of stone and silence. If your eyes are already heavy, and your thoughts are beginning to drift, let the gentle echoes of this story carry you into sleep. Let the past wrap around you like a warm cloak, and may peace settle softly in your dreams. But if you're still awake, and your mind still wanders, why not stay with us a little longer? Why not try another of our journeys, or allow the music to send you off to sleep? There are many more peaceful adventures waiting just beyond the horizon. Until then, sleep well, dream deep, and thank you for listening